LLC. Everybody should have in the packet the agreement that we were looking at last week, or 2 weeks ago, I should say, the last meeting. Mr. Zwolenski, myself, and the administrator did meet with Green Development and their attorney, Mr. Pusini. He did send in a voluminous amount of documentation, but it was not here in time for the packet. So we can accept it and use it going forward, but I think for today, we need to stick with what's in what is in our packet right now.
Mr. President, is Mr. Mancini here to represent? Okay, I just wanted to clarify before I ask a question to our council. Just thanks a second. Solicitor Igliozzi, I want to make sure that my thoughts of what I've discussed in the past get considered for amendments to this agreement. And if the council will indulge me, it may be a little repetitive, but I would like to go through some of my concerns. Is that okay, Mr. President?
Yep. That's what we're here for, to discuss this.
On August 5th, we were promised some of this information within a couple of days. We didn't get it. VJ Day, which is a holiday in Rhode Island, we acquiesced and met with developers and legal attorney on a holiday, left our family. Again, we were promised the information. And Mr. Mancini, not to you, but more toward your client, this can't keep going on. So at some point in time, the developer's sense of urgency will never be this town's sense of urgency by the history of receiving material and time. The other piece that I'd like to go into, Solicitor Igliozzi, I served on the zoning review committee I was actually a town planner when we wrote the cell phone tower ordinance. There was a concern about proliferation of cell phone towers throughout the state. We looked at other communities' best practices, and we came to the idea that we made it mandatory that if a cell phone tower went up, competitive cell phone carriers would be given the opportunity to co-locate on those towers to stop, again, multiple towers throughout town. I'm not sure if Mr. Mancini is going to be able to answer this question I posed. I'm sure you will, sorry. I just want to make sure I want to preface it. I'm a little concerned about the 9 limited liability companies over there. Can you explain to us one more time why there's going to be 9 limited liability companies? And also, if those 9 limited liability companies have been identified to certain parcels. Okay, so is every limited liability connected to a parcel of land? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the board, good evening. John Mancini on behalf of Green Development. I apologize for the tardiness of the information. I can only speak on behalf of my client, Green Development, and Steve Brusini, who has been doing the bulk of this work. Again, I don't know what was promised or when it was promised, but I do apologize, and I am prepared to go through it. There are essentially 2 separate agreements. One's the development agreement, and the second is the actual tax stabilization agreement. We can walk through that and kind of describe and identify for you the purpose for the 2 separate agreements and what those changes are. But to address the councilman in his question specifically, so the project has a total what's called the nameplate capacity, which is essentially the amount of power that will be generated and attributed to National Grid, and then ultimately to the end user, which is going to be by way of a power purchase agreement. And that's exactly 38.4 megawatts. The project is then divided into 9 separate entities with the creative name of JDIM. Sorry.
Gentlemen, could you just go out there or turn it down, please?
So, I'm sorry. So the entities, the project is then subdivided into essentially 9 separate entities, and as I said, with the creative name of JDIM 1 through 9, and that stands for Green Development Iron Mountain 1 through 9. And it's all going to be developed, and it's all going to be presented to the planning board as one project and essentially one development. The purpose for the separate entities is essentially to create separate power purchase agreements depending on who is going to be the ultimate producer of the power and who's ultimately going to be utilizing that. Whether or not they're going to have separate parcels, Right now, my understanding is that they are. They're all going to get separate identified areas and separate parcels with separate designated power nameplates and output. And because of that, you have in front of you 9 separate development agreements and 9 separate tax stabilization agreements, all of which terms are identical, except for the actual numbers. And how that changes is by way of the formula that we've created. So the development agreement addresses 3 things. One is the decommissioning bond, the one-time development payment, if you will, and then ultimately the understanding that the parties will enter into a tax stabilization agreement. The tax stabilization agreement is the actual instrument that's authorized by Rhode Island general laws that allows the municipality to do these types of stabilizations, which allows you to recoup or be able to acquire more money than what the statute is permitted. So as you know, the statute creates a floor of a minimum of $5,000 per megawatt. The tax stabilization agreement allows for you to collect that plus an additional $2,000 per megawatt. And then the formula is identified as $2 per kilowatt. And there's 1,000 kilowatts that go into a 1 megawatt. And so ultimately what the final determination, what the final nameplate is may be different, but the formula is the same. So you're going to, for the tax stabilization in the agreement, you're identifying now what that formula is that gets applied to the ultimate output. With the development, the same thing. The decommissioning bond has a formula that provides per megawatt what the cost of the bond would be, and that would be a cash bond. So it gets filed with the town on day 1. With respect to the development, a development fee or the one-time upfront fee, if you will, that's also described by formula. That would be $5,000 per megawatt. So whatever the output is, it's multiplied by the $5,000 and that gets paid on day 1 once the final approvals have been submitted. I can also address some of the questions that the audience members had. As far as whether or not Green Development has the wherewithal to do the project, we're strongly believe that it does. It is a renewable energy company that focuses not only on solar but also wind turbines. It has done wind turbines. I'm sure the town is very familiar with its latest attempt to do wind in North Smithfield, but it has done it in Portsmouth, it's done it in Coventry, it has done it in Johnston. It has also done solar. It has done solar in Richmond, it has done solar in Hopkinton, it is doing solar in Johnston, West Greenwich, and Gloucester. I don't know the exact megawatts, but I can get you that information. I do know that we are the largest solar developer in the state, for whatever that means. We can get you that information. But keep in mind that this development is going to get vented not only by the town council, but it will ultimately be vented by the state agencies. It's going to be reviewed by DEM. It's going to get reviewed by your planning board through two public hearing processes. One which will be the preliminary plan, and as the board may be familiar, the preliminary plan will require the applicant to submit all of and any state approvals. And one of the other submissions that we will do at preliminary plan is evidence that we have the ability, or that we have a commitment for inter-service connection agreement, ISA. What an ISA is the actual agreement with National Grid, which says that this developer has met the stringent standards of National Grid in order to connect. So that's going to be one of the items that we'll produce at preliminary and certainly by final. So you'll know once this project gets final plan approval, that it has been vented by the planning board, it's been vented by DEM, and it has been vented by National Grid. And then the final venting process, which comes with every project, is going to be through the bank. This is going to be a finance project, so the bank's going to want to ensure that guarantees are in place, that agreements with National Grid are in place, that agreements with power purchasers and alternate end users are in place, that all the approvals with state agencies have been finalized and obtained and recorded, and that all municipal approvals have been obtained, finalized, and recorded. So this is certainly not a one-stop shop process. This is a very large process. It involves a multitude of different levels of review, all of which will ensure that the project gets done. And once, in my experience, has been once a developer is able to go through all those milestones, the project's going to happen. And so you can take some comfort in knowing that there are safety valves along the way to ensure that that takes place. With regards to the one-time donation, that will be set in stone by way of the development agreement. And it's be done in a manner that doesn't require there to be any shift in leverage, either on the developer side or on the town side, because it's going to be done by a formula. So the parties are going to agree to a formula gets agreed at the onset, and then it gets applied through the process. With respect to the bond, as I noted, the decommissioning bond would be a cash bond that would be agreed to at this point, and then it would be funded on day one. With regards to issues concerning blasting and wells, that's going to be vetted through the planning board process. And once we get to the planning board, we'll be able to better know for the planning board what blasting will be necessary. And from blasting, once we have the blasting plan in play, we'll then have a better understanding of who will be in that area, what wells will be in that area, and how we want to implement that. There's already a state mandated process for blasting that encompasses the idea of determination of wells, foundations, and other items. So we'll apply to that. But if there's a want or a desire for bonding at that point through the planning board process, we'll address that as well. But again, that will be done at the planning board process as opposed to being done at this process.
Mr. Mancini, while you're on blasting, I'm
Go
sorry to
ahead.
interrupt you.
No, great.
So basically, there'll be a pre-blast testing of quality of water and an inspection of homes in the area for foundations and other walls and whatnot?
Yeah, as you know, I mean, that's pretty standard procedure, and we're not opposed to going one step further. And that is if it has to be a determination to, well, they're going to test foundations, they'll test the existing benchmark for water and whatever else we need to look at, but we'll definitely do that. And that'll also be blessed by the fire marshal too. That plan gets submitted to the state fire marshal.
24-hour notice?
Correct,
Yes.
24-hour notice,
Thank
and yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Excellent. And then one final point with regards to the document. So I do know, I know it's a lot of material, but it's a lot of repetitive material. There's unfortunately 8 development agreements and 9 TSAs, the tax stabilization agreements. The red lines have been made, which incorporate the comments that were discussed between the town and developer. You know, we want to give you as much information as you need to make the decision that you need to make. So I'm not going to force you to make a decision if you don't believe you've had ample opportunity to review the documents. But whatever questions you have, I can answer them.
I
Point
have
you to the
more
documents.
questions, Mr.
Yeah.
President, with your indulgence. Thank you. So the entire project right now, the nameplate capacity is 38.4, is that correct?
Correct.
So my concern with Green Development, Iron Mine Limited Liability entities, I don't want to lock ourselves into 38.4 megawatts. Who's to say technology does not advance today, tomorrow, where a solar panel can be triple or quadruple the output? Now, if we have these different entities, this is a scenario I'm painting. 4 or 5 of them put out 35 megawatts. I don't want to put ourselves in a position, it's going to come back to the solicitor to make sure this doesn't happen to us, that if the other remaining limited liabilities come online, we certainly would want the town not to be limited to an agreement that says 38.4 megawatts for the entire zone overlay or the parcels that your client is presenting. So that was a concern of mine. What else? Do I have something else? Oh, and then, okay.
Can we keep going on while we're talking about the nameplate and whatnot? My understanding of this agreement is the nameplate can change. The value of that nameplate can change.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I want to clear in the...
So that's part of the formula.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
But the other side of that is the value of that nameplate, I guess, or the amount of the nameplate is being restricted by the planning board
Right.
to being under 40. That's part of the planning board's approval process, that it can't be greater than 40, or it needs to go to
State.
state regulating
Yeah,
commission or whatever,
PUC,
energy
site.
regulating commission or whatever, which could take like a 2-year period or whatever.
Sure.
And so the nameplate capacity is set almost by the planning board, but it could be changed. It could be changed because the agreement allows for it to be changed if it's increased, and the planning board allows that.
So
So,
that was I was
and
trying
that's,
to
and that's,
articulate
and that's part of the agreement that
Yes.
is part of that formula. So
Right.
if the number changed,
Correct. So said another way, that formula is adjustable. If the nameplate increases, the formula calls for the town getting more money. If the nameplate decreases, they get less money. So your revenue stream is based upon the power in the nameplate. But to note that in the future, if you do get more efficient panels, two things can happen. One is project can enlarge, whereby we use the same acreage, we're just going to add more efficient solar panels to it, which will enlarge the 38.4 megawatts, but that will require us to revisit the planning board.
What if you had out of the 9 limited liabilities, if you had 3, 3, and 3, would it require if you had, if you use, I'm going to make, again, a scenario, 3 lots, 1 limited liability, and you may not be breaking them down by 3, 3, 3, I get that. Would it be, how would it affect if 3 of the limited liabilities would have created 38.4, and then next year, a year later, 1, 2, or 3 other limited liabilities come in with another 38.4 or less, depending on, it's trying to be evasive of the state review. I get it. There's a time constraint on your part. I understand why this is being done. But I would really like the solicitor to take a look at this to make sure that if it moves over into other parcels of land, that the agreement follows along with any other additional manufacturing of renewable energy.
Yeah. So that's a really good point. So, let's remember that these agreements are going to be not so much tied to the entity, but tied to the approval. The approval is what you have now, which is a master plan. That master plan has a limitation of development. So it incorporates already what the lots are. We don't have to remove the lot lines. In fact, I don't believe we're merging any lots at all. We're keeping the lot lines where they are. We're just identifying the areas as if you would do a phase 1 development versus a phase 2 versus a phase 3. So they're all going to be phased. But you know what your area is going to be, and that area is then going to move to your preliminary plan and your final plan. Your final plan is going to show the area which these documents are attached to that final plan. If that plan enlarges, we have no choice but to go back to the planning board, restart the process, and that would trigger us to come back here. The likelihood, once you get the nameplate, it's not going to diminish and it's not going to increase. You're going to be set at that 38.4. That's the output that you're going to get. The only way you can change that is if we add more panels or if we get more efficient panels. But if we change the amount of capacity, we're going to have to come back to the planning board. Similar to as if you had an 8-lot subdivision and all of a sudden you wanted to do 9 lots, we'd have to come back to the planning board for that 9th lot. So view the output as lot numbers. So it's you're approving us for 38.4 megawatts of electrical output and the design that's associated with doing that type of output.
Part of my understanding from your client was that another reason too for the limited liabilities in case of decommissioning would make it easier to decommission. And I want to make sure that the language is really solid, and if we come to an agreement, I want to make sure the language is very solid in saying that the decommissioning, how does that affect our revenue flow? Are we still going to be, again, a scenario, if you were to drop from 38.4 to say 30 megawatts, is the town going to be assured the payment on 38.4, or do we fall back and get $210,000 on megawatt?
Yeah. So they all, regardless of what our output is going to be for any particular year, the number that goes to the town is going to be set on the ultimate. So you'll never get less than the 38.4.
But we can get more.
Right.
Okay.
I'm sorry. You can get more if we can get more panels, but
Yeah.
but in that 15 years, 10 years from now, maybe even 5 years, it's possible you can get more efficient panels, and that would mean it would come back for more.
But that was, just so I wanted to, that was the other thing that Mark had said though, having the multiple limited liabilities. If panels got more efficient, they could actually downsize the size of the array, eliminate some without losing the nameplate capacity.
Sure, and who knows, maybe the state will change it where it's no longer 40 because they have an existing, who knows what advantageous that could be out there for the development.
We just need to make sure that we're covered that way.
So just a couple things to maybe clarify my own sense. So you said that the nameplate capacity will stay regardless, we'll get paid for the 38.4, but earlier you said that there could be a decrease down the line. What drives the decrease in nameplate capacity? I know it has to go in front of the planning board, but does it have to do with the panels? Does it have to do with projects coming offline? Like,
So that's a good question. What could impact, let me back up. So our intention is to do 38.4. Our agreement would be 38.4. So that's what the town would get paid for. However, if between now and by the time we get to the planning board, for whatever reason, DM wants to bring our buffers, wants to make the buffers larger, because either we find some vernal pools or you find some type of area that requires larger than what's expected in buffering, that would diminish the amount of panels we could put out there, and our output would go down. I don't see the likelihood of that. I think that's highly unlikely that that may happen. If it does happen, it would probably impact less than a meg. So you may be looking at 37.5 or something like that. But that's highly speculative. I don't see that happening here at all because we've already done our wetlands determination, and we've done a lot of the species determination. So what's been done to date gives us assurance that the buffers are appropriate and that the size of the development is going to maintain its form as it has been approved for master plan.
Okay. My other question is, we talked about, inside the agreement, it talks about a removal escrow, but yet the term cash bond is still being used. So for consistency purposes, shouldn't it still say removal escrow
It does.
throughout the decommissioning agreement?
Yeah, I'm referring to a cash bond to make it a little bit easier to understand, but it's essentially it's an escrow account. It gets created and it gets funded, as opposed to a bond which is not funded. A bond is you have to go through the process of calling the bond and getting them, whereas this is a little bit quicker than going through that process.
Renewed, maybe not renewed.
Maybe not.
Who's watching it?
Yeah. Who's issuing it?
Well, this is not gonna happen.
So again, I'm sorry,